Well, good morning, everybody. I do appreciate you showing up for this, what I'm calling the 2024 EHS planning session. Um, we've done this the last couple of years, and really just to try to get people to kick off their management systems effectively. And it seems to be one of the things that we stumble across when we do the certification audits that uh, organizations didn't get off to a good start. They got too busy, and then we get out there to do an assessment, and their system is not being effectively implemented. So, again, that's kind of the reason that we put this program together, and just trying to encourage you guys, if you are certified, to get a few key things done early, and then maybe make a few suggestions here for some best practices and so forth. Again, a lot of you are certified to 14,000. Some of you have implemented 45,001 for health and safety. One of the nice things that the ISO folks did for us is they finally integrated all of these standards, quality, environmental, and health and safety along the same format. So it makes it a lot easier for organizations to uh, integrate their management system. So this can truly be a management system that companies use to manage their business. Briefly, a lot of you I know already, you're great customers. I appreciate the work that we do get to do with you. A few of you that signed up that are less familiar with us, we are focused primarily on management system consulting, auditing, and training. We do primarily work with the ISO 14,000 and 45,001 standards. We do compliance assessments, and I'm trying to get everybody muted. And that's our core business. So again, this is it was free, but brought to you by EHS Management Strategies. One program that we developed in response to COVID was our blended auditor program, which is a training for internal auditors. It's instructor-led webinars plus some video lessons and self-directed workshops, and people have had a good response to this program. So at some point, if you do get interested in some auditor training, consider getting a hold of us. Okay. What are we going to talk about? Well, again, I'm hoping some of you folks can share some best practices and things that you do to get your system started on the right foot as we go through some of the things that I feel can be somewhat problematic in getting organizations moving. And here are a few of the key points. But again, the reason that I put this program together was to engage with you folks, either my existing customers or potential customers, and just talk about things that I see as an auditor creating problems, getting systems started, maintained, and causing some disruption during your registration audits. First step is don't forget about last year. Okay, if you did an internal audit last year, which we hope you did, if those findings are still open, get them closed. Make sure they're documented in your corrective action system. Make sure they're documented through closure. The same if you went through a surveillance audit last year or a recertification audit, make sure that those corrective actions are documented and closed. And again, I still get to a lot of organizations where they'll do these compliance evaluations, and they never get the corrective actions. Either they won't do them fully, or maybe they get things done, but they don't completely document the corrective actions for the compliance assessments. So first step is make sure we got everything done from last year, and that gets us in a good place. The next thing I suggest is to take a look at your resource needs. Many organizations, we have turnover, we have we lose resources, or we didn't have enough resources last year, and we need to kind of ramp up the resources that we have for this year to get things started correctly. So the first thing I ask you to do is take a look at your leadership team. Did you lose some key managers? Did you lose a maintenance manager, an engineering manager, folks that may have been a key part of your program? And then ask yourself the question, how well does the existing management team understand our ISO processes? And again, from my perspective, managers are getting much better and more proficient in these areas. I'm still getting out to about 25% of my site where I don't think the entire team is plugged in. And this is a good opportunity to maybe improve that. Because as you go through your registration audits and with your certification company, having a purchasing manager or a quality manager that doesn't fully understand either the environmental program or the health and safety management process, it makes these external audits go a little, I'll say, clunkier, and that is a technical term. Key staff, maybe you've lost the former EHS manager and you have a new one, or maybe you're the new guy in town. Make sure that the leadership team just doesn't forget this stuff has to happen, and make sure that those responsibilities, if you've got a new maintenance manager and they had some key responsibilities relative to spill response, some of the waste streams, make sure that they are fully aware that those are part of their current responsibilities. I'm always surprised when I go into an organization and they lose a key person and then they forget to tell the new. I'm sorry?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'll liaise with you later. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
No. So again, just take a look at your leadership team, key resources. If you've had some turnover, make sure that the responsibilities have been communicated to the new manager. And I had another great idea, but I lost it. Yeah, and one of the things, again, I'm suggesting is, everybody has a new hire orientation process. And this is what we run our hourly people through. But I'll tell you, to this day, 50 to 75% of the companies, when they hire a new manager or supervisor, that's all the training they give them, is that general orientation. So I always suggest if you've got new managers coming in, they should sit down with the leader of the environmental and the safety team, and you should explain the basic ISO processes to them. What are your significant aspects? How did you evaluate them? What are your key risks and hazards? What's your risk assessment process look like? As a manager, I do believe they need to have a good understanding of these processes, but yet I don't see a lot of companies where they'll have a managerial level orientation to either an environmental or safety management system process. Internal auditors, again, if you had trained auditors that left the company, maybe you need to look at training some new people. Again, just take a look at how you plan to conduct your audits and make sure you've got the resources there you need. And again, one action item is to look at all these areas and make sure that you've got the resources that you need to move forward the year and effectively manage your environmental and safety management processes. So this again, if I had to talk about root causes, this is definitely a root cause for some companies that fall off the railroad tracks. Okay, Another area, and again, I had this conversation with a lot of organizations that I do end up visiting, is this
Uh,
whole, yeah,
Jimmy, sorry to interrupt. Hi, this is your friend Nadum. How are you?
good. How are you doing?
Not bad. These are very good points. Is there any way that you're going to put those online later on that we could review them, those slides?
Yeah, I will, if you want copies of the slides, I will send these out to you folks. That will not be a problem.
Thank you, sir.
That'll save you from having to write so much. Okay, and it's this whole concept of either environmental performance or safety performance, and frankly, I think it's easier to measure on the safety side. But there's three sections of the standard that I feel deal with very similar concepts, but they can, and in many instances, are different. There's one section in the standards that talk about setting environmental and safety objectives. There's another section of the standard that deal with monitoring and measuring environmental and safety performance. And then there's another requirement to have an effective continuous improvement process. And again, while these things are definitely related, they are different, and they require specific actions. And I think to have an effective program, they can be documented that way. So let's first talk about establishing objectives. And again, we use these ISO terms that I will say trigger your auditors, because when you use that word objective, it triggers them to think of this section and these requirements. But again, I use the term goals interchangeably with objectives. And when I think about the concept of an objective, I think of, we'll look at your program goals, kind of a broader view. What is our objective of our environmental program? Is our objective to be in compliance with a significant air permit? Or is our objective to use less energy? Do we want to put less waste into a landfill? So again, those are some of the things that I think of. A couple of myths is every objective doesn't have to be to improve something. We have a requirement to improve, but that's another section. And we can set objectives to improve, but we may set some objectives to just control either a significant aspect or a compliance obligation, or potentially set an objective. This year, we want to investigate ways that we can use less water. And our whole objective is just to go through a process to look at our water usage and identify potential water reduction projects and initiatives. The
Jimmy,
standard talks about a couple of things.
James?
Yeah.
Speaking about this, and this is something I am personally struggling with. When it comes to environmental, it's a pretty straightforward. You reduce waste going to landfill by 2% to 3%. But when it comes to safety, how can you set that target, a specific target into that? Let's say I want to improve safety in general. I want to increase the safety awareness. I want to instill a safety culture. But how can you measure that? And then you are as an auditor coming to audit me. How can you tell that I am successful or not? Is it by the initiatives? Is it by I don't know what tasks? Could you please elaborate on this?
Yeah, and I think environmental is tough too. But when you set an objective for your safety program, obviously our objective is to not hurt people. And but again, I think targeting things like Um, maybe an objective might be to implement a behavior-based safety process, or to implement, to improve our safety culture. And then if that's the goal, how do you measure that? And that might be through enhanced communications. It can be through an employee suggestion process where you want to implement employee suggestions. Maybe you want to improve your safety training process, and you can attach the measurable element to any of those initiatives. Because when we talk about measuring safety performance, and we got a place to do the metrics, to look at the lost time injuries, the recordables, the the actual indicators, but your objective can be much broader. And I will agree that some ISO auditors try to push that measurable point beyond where they should, and that's where you as the auditee need to step up, and you say, this is our program, this is how we articulate objectives, this is how we measure them, and this is how we conform. Because oftentimes your ISO auditors come in as the expert, acting like they know everything, and companies that don't stand up and say, this is our system and this is how we do it, can sometimes get rolled over by what I'll call a pushy or aggressive ISO auditor. But again, good questions. And then the standards talk about, what do we consider? Our policy, our significant aspects or hazards and risk, our compliance obligations. Those are the things that we consider when we bracket these goals and objectives. But again, it's up to you as the organization to do it. One of the myths is every objective has to target an improvement. And the old days, they used to think every significant aspect had to have an objective. Those are misinterpretations of the standards. So again, we're going to set either broad program level goals and objectives, or maybe something department specific. But again, once you call something an objective, the auditor says, well, where's your action plan? What are you going to do to achieve the objective? What's the time frame? Who's responsible? How do you monitor that objective through the year to determine, are we achieving the objective or are we trending in the wrong direction? And those will be some typical audit questions about objectives. Section 911 talks about monitoring, measuring, and analyzing your performance. And it's taken me a number of years to get my arms and my brain cells around some of these things, but monitoring is different from measuring. And sometimes I say I monitor and I measure my electrical usage, but really, when I say it this way, at least to myself, it becomes a little clearer to me. So in the ISO guidance documents, it talks about monitoring. This generally refers to the process where observations are made over time without necessarily involving monitoring or equipment. Measurement usually refers to the processes where equipment typically used to demonstrate a quantitative or qualitative property. So monitoring, maybe we're doing inspections, maybe we're doing preventative maintenance. Those would be considered monitoring type activities. Measuring, I read a flow meter for water. I look at my pH in my wastewater system. I read my electrical meters. That's more of a measurement concept. But both monitoring and measurement activities can be used to define the performance of your system. So the question is to evaluate performance, am I meeting my defined performance criteria? So again, as you're trying to define, the performance of your program, to have a dashboard, keep in mind that there may be monitoring activities. I monitor the number of spills I have. My criteria might be to have less than 5 spills per year. How am I performing? Well, how am I performing to that performance criteria? And again, what should you monitor? Your objectives, maybe the controls around your significant aspects, your compliance obligations. You've got a oxidizer that you use to treat your air emissions. We've got to do monitoring of the oxidizer to make sure that it's burning at the right temperature, that you've got a PM schedule to maintain the oxidizer. That's part of your air permit. And then you should look at how do I monitor my operational controls. That might be a monthly environmental inspection where you're going through the facility and you're looking at waste management, you're looking at spills and leaks, and you're doing other environmental inspections. And again, when you take a look at the safety side, is this a leading indicator versus a lagging indicator? But the ultimate, and this makes it easy for me because I got to remind myself, the standards talk about monitoring and measuring performance. To do that, you have to establish your expectation or performance criteria. You compare your results to the criteria, and then that tells you how well you're performing. And again, I see organizations still struggling with articulating what it is that defines environmental performance for them or safety. And I really like to pick on my plant managers and my leadership team, because during an opening meeting, that's one of my questions. How is your system performing, Mr. Plant Manager? And the way they answer that question tells me a lot about the leadership of the organization. So any questions about how you might be monitoring or measuring performance? I've got a few examples in a minute here. And then the third element here, and again, this stuff all sounds very similar, but 10.1 and 10.3 say we shall improve. And we have to have processes in place to seek improvement. So 10.1 says we need to have processes to identify opportunities for improvement. And these can be things that come up during your monitoring and measuring, your internal audits and inspections, management review. Maybe you've got an employee suggestion program. You've got processes in place to seek out and identify opportunities for improvement. If you have that, then you conform. It also says once you identify the opportunities to improve and you decide which ones to move forward on, that you need to take actions to achieve the improvements. That makes sense. And then lastly, 10.3 kind of asks you to focus your improvements on areas that will improve your defined performance criteria and ultimately reduce risk. So as you can see, the concept of setting objectives, monitoring and measuring performance, and continuous improvement are all interrelated, but they are quite different processes. And again, when we audit those requirements, we're going to audit each section and how you apply those sections to your organization. So again, just a couple of examples of ways to monitor the EMS might be auditing, inspections, on-time corrective actions, percent training completed, percent PM activities completed on time. Those are, monitoring your PM activities. You're already doing that as part of your quality program. Let's take credit for environmental. That's a way to monitor and measure your operational controls. Percent training completed. And then you're looking at things that you might measure. Electrical use per part, a scrap rate, pounds of waste to landfill. How much did I send to the landfill? How much did I recycle? A percent recycled. Again, hopefully you're kind of seeing what the difference between monitoring performance means versus measuring performance. And in your program should include elements of both. And again, the key to both of these is to establish your performance criteria. What is it that you expect? Compare what you're doing against those, and monitoring the performance against those expectations. Again, on the safety side, briefly looking at what might be considered a lagging indicator. Again, these are indicators after the fact, after somebody has already been hurt, after there's already been a near miss, after there's already been a first aid injury. And then things that we might track or measure that could be perceived as leading indicators, indicators that can help us to prevent the injury, getting the training done on time, maybe safety-based observations and risk reduction, internal safety audits. Again, how effectively are those things being completed? And again, I just threw this in. This is kind of a higher level. We'll call it a dashboard that an organization might have. But I think the concept of an environmental performance dashboard is very relevant, because it's a way to present the information to the management team so they can understand it. Excuse me. Okay. And then here's an example of a performance matrix that I've used in a number of different organizations. But again, however you choose to document your program, it's up to you. And again, what I'll say, if any of the things that we talk about you'd like copies of or would like electronically, just send me an email after this presentation. Okay, so we've looked at our activities from last year. We've got everything closed out. We've looked at our resource needs and identified any gaps. We're going to get our objectives for this year set. We're going to look at our metrics for measuring performance. We're going to visit with our engineering team and other departments to look at continuous improvement ideas. Now, another thing that we see fall by the wayside sometimes is that things don't get scheduled early in the year, so people kind of forget to do them because they get so busy. So again, in the first quarter, our goals and objectives should be established and documented with the management team. Internal audit, it's no mystery. We've got to do an audit or audits. So get that audit schedule done and make sure you got the right resources. Make sure you've got a good idea when you're going to do your management review. And again, most organizations, kind of the best practice that we see is where companies are still doing kind of an annual review to cover all the requirements of the standard. But then during their monthly or weekly manager meetings, giving updates with relative to their metrics or objectives or other issues relative to the management system. And what I consider to be kind of a best practice is like, say, maybe the first part of February, you might schedule a management review. You might look at all of the data and information in 23, so over the last fiscal year, and then you review the performance of the systems with the management team, in that fiscal year with the management team. Some folks are still doing, management reviews kind of mid-year, just before their certification audit. That's fine, but I do believe if you can align that management review process up with the fiscal planning, I think it could potentially be more receptive to your leadership team. And then we've got your training. We know we've got training to do this year. Okay, get a schedule. Each month, what training do we plan? And even if things happen where it gets moved, or we don't get to it in the month that we think it is, at least we've got a plan that we can adjust as we need. And then lastly, take a look at the kind of the schedule for your next registration audit, whether it's a recertification or surveillance audit. Make sure that you're aware of when it should be about, even if you don't have a schedule. You may need to reach out to your registration company and push on them to get some dates. And then just make sure, again, that the leadership team is fully aware of when this audit will occur and when to expect it. Again, another plug here. We do support a lot of you guys in getting your audits completed. So one of the ways we do that is our internal auditor training. And again, we talked about that already. A lot of companies, I wouldn't say a lot, maybe 25 to 30% of the companies I audit choose to outsource internal auditing. And there's some different ways to do that. And again, I think there is a good business case to outsource your audits. You don't have to train auditors. It frees your staff up because they're already too busy. Sometimes you can get a little better audit done with a professional auditor, and it can oftentimes better prepare you for your next registration audit. Okay. Oh, communication. It's all about the communication. Is that not right? That's what they keep telling me. Well, again, the reason I put this plug in here is because we still get to organizations where basic environmental, especially on the environmental side, basic awareness continues to be a challenge in some organizations. And frankly, that's because they're not talking about these programs often enough. So kind of the best practice is where, you guys might have toolbox talks, a monthly safety talk, a monthly huddle, whatever your normal communication process with your hourly associates. I would encourage you to tag team on that and come up with some topics. And I encourage companies to have a plan. We got 12 months, come up with 12 topics. Here's everything we're going to do to share information about our environmental program and safety as well. The one thing that I do ask you to do is don't give EHS updates. When you give an EHS update, all people hear is safety. And frankly, part of the problem, I think, in a lot of sites is they don't get used to hearing this word environmental enough, because they know they manage scrap, but they think of quality. They know they lock out, tag out because of safety. They don't always understand, well, the reason that we're recycling so much is because of the environment. So when you give the updates, say, here's our environmental update for the month. Here's our safety update. Use the word environmental. try to stay away from that word EHS. It muddies the water a little bit with this word environmental. And then I always say resist the temptation for the EHS person or leader to give all the updates. Come up with a brief talking point, hand it out to the supervisors or team leads, ask them to present that information. And what that does is it forces them to understand it as well. And again, on the environmental side, remind people, the company has an environmental policy. They want to protect the environment. You protect the environment by making good parts, recycling everything you can, and reporting any air or oil leaks. Keep it basic. Our objective this year is, this is what you do in the event of a spill. I mean, just basic environmental topics, 1 or 2 minutes a month, and you'd be surprised at how much this helps when it comes to going through your registration audits. Because when I'm an auditor and I'm out auditing and asking people questions that you haven't explained to them well enough, it's hard on me. It's also hard on them to be asked a question by an outside person that they're ill-equipped to answer. And lastly, some common findings that we're still seeing, and I would remind you to think about during the year. The first one is failure to close out findings from your prior audit. Your registration company was at your site a year ago. They may have left you with corrective actions or findings. Make sure that you've completed the corrective actions and that those corrective actions continue to be effective. Because when your registration company comes back and sees the same nonconformance again, they're going to write up a major nonconformance under your corrective action process because you didn't fix it right. And again, I consider it a no-brainer, but I'm still surprised at the sites I go to where I left them 2 minor nonconformances and they didn't bother the week before I showed up to make sure that they're fixed. So don't do that. Spill drills, under the emergency response requirement, you're required to do some form of a drill or test of your spill response process. One of the things that we did was we came up with what I call a spill drill form that I have been handing out to people as an example of how to document a good spill drill. And if you're interested in that, please let me know. I will share that with you. But again, it's not that you have to go out and spill something and clean it up to test it. There's just different ways that you can actually test the readiness. Because under emergency response, you identified a potential spill as a hazard. You wrote a procedure on how to deal with it. Then the next step was you trained people on the procedure and you purchased some equipment. You've got some spill kits. You've got covers for your drains. You've got other equipment. And then the third phase is to test. Is our plan and was our training and is our equipment being maintained? Is this all effective? And in the event of a spill, will we be ready? And however you choose to do that and document it is perfectly acceptable. Contractor communications, again, trying to find documentation for when you bring a contractor in. How do you explain to them your environmental and your safety rules? That continues to be problematic. Some sites are not doing a very good job documenting risk. Again, I do apologize for the coughing. Risk relative to your aspects, risk relative to your compliance obligations, and risk relative to your scope and context. all need to be documented in some format. On the safety side, sometimes we'll see companies with a lack of participation. 45,000 requires that employees are participating in the incident investigation process and risk assessment process. Sometimes that's missing. We continue to see waste management, labeling, dating, containers being closed. Please, before your auditor shows up, walk your plant, make sure the waste containers are properly labeled and closed. And then lastly, when you do a corrective action to a nonconformance, you're supposed to go back and verify what you've done is effective. And that review of effectiveness should be documented somehow. So if you've done the correction, you've fixed the problem, you've done a root cause assessment, you've implemented corrective actions, you've closed out the nonconformance, how do you go back later and through some process verify that what you did has been effective? Now, one of the easiest ways to do that is during your next internal audit, make sure your auditors document a review of the prior findings. Make sure they validate that your corrective actions have been effective. And if there's a repeat finding, make sure you find that in your internal audit and you fix it. That way, when your certification company comes back, they don't write you up for that major under repeat findings. Again, I just threw this one in here. There's two ISO guidance documents. They make for good reads. There's one, 1431 is a whole document about how to monitor and measure environmental performance. And then ISO 31000 is all about how to establish a framework for risk management, which that's especially relevant under the 45,000 requirements. Again, I just mentioned them there. If you get aggressive this year and you want to, read up on a few of these things, I think both of these are good reads. Having a framework for risk and establishing performance criteria are parts of both standards. So, and I don't like how much they charge for these things. The ISO people, I think, gouge us on their PDFs, but that's what they charge. And then lastly, a couple more shout outs for us. We're going to do another program here to line out how to implement 45,000. If you're interested in that, let us know. That'll be another free 1-hour workshop on how to implement those requirements. Again, we do offer DOT hazmat and RCRA has waste training, and we will be offering a internal auditor training soon. And if you need any of that stuff, let me know. And that is it. Now, right now is where we can add a lot of value by you guys having some questions. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Hi, Jimmy. Can I ask a question, please?
I sure can.
Okay. Jimmy, we are just implementing the ISO 45,000.
Sure.
It will be implemented by the end of this month. If there is, I wrote quite a few things, and your last slides, I felt good. I really felt good that a lot of things we are doing. But
Good.
the things that I have concern about is the internal audits. You came to this subject repeatedly about internal audits. Now, if this is a brand new program, and we do have internal auditors, but very few of them, and the internal audits that were made that were done are very few and far between. So
Yeah.
my question to you is this, because it's a new program. Is this a problem when it comes to the implementation by the auditors to be certified? The second question is I have, can we identify this as a car, as something that we are working on, and that will help us out in avoiding getting a finding, if I
Okay.
said it correctly?
No, that's a good question. And again, it may sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but if I'm sitting in your shoes, this is what I would suggest, especially with a new certification. You can't just write a card that says our internal audit program's not fully implemented and our auditors aren't fully competent. Now, if you've got competent auditors and they can demonstrate competency in both the ISO 45001 process as well as auditing, they can do your internal audit, document it, and it should be okay-ish. What what a lot of organizations that I work with do, especially with a new certification, they want a good internal audit to identify all the gaps and have those gaps fixed before registration. They also want their management team to be audited in a similar fashion so that they're ready to perform during the audit. So there's a lot of value to potentially outsourcing that first internal audit to somebody like us. And then the other thing that I would say is if I were to come in and do an internal audit, and you've got some auditors that you feel are good auditors, but maybe not as proficient in 45,000 as you'd like them, we can include them in our audit, and then at the conclusion of that audit, issue a training certificate to show that they have participated in an audit and been trained on the ISO 45001 standard through that process. So again, I know it sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, but I would say if you have clearly trained and competent internal audits that can demonstrate competency in 45001, they can do the audit. But they may not do it in a fashion that'll get your management team and your plant ready for that certification assessment. That would be the only thing I would caution you against. So I hope that's answered your question.
It answered my question partly, but my question is again, would that be a problem to the new auditors that are coming to audit us to see that we implemented the program so we get our certification?
Well,
that
if you
audits have not been done fully and comprehensively by competent environment safety auditors.
No, that won't be acceptable, and they would highly, depending on what you gave them, they would likely write up either a major nonconformance or at least a minor. But more than likely, if the program's not evident and competent auditors in place, they would more than likely write up a major nonconformance. So you can't pull that, well, we got a car in place and we're working on it card, especially for an initial certification. That will not fly. But thanks for the good question. And any other questions on the stuff that we covered, or maybe you can share a best practice for things that you do at your site that you think have been effective.
So again, so hiring an internal auditor, say a week or two, that's before the big audit, you think that would help getting us, that would help?
Well, I think, especially if you're getting up close to a deadline, if let's say you were scheduled for your audit in late January, early February, okay, the one requirement they're going to audit you to is your internal audit. So if you were to bring in an external auditor, to do a complete internal audit, that would be more than fine. Now, that audit may generate findings. Those findings would not have to be completely closed out to satisfy the audit requirement. So if you did the internal audit just a week or so before your registration audit, and let's say they identified 5 nonconformities. If you documented those nonconformities and maybe even started on them, you'd probably be fine. You wouldn't have to have everything fixed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, thanks. Okay. And any other folks thinking about 45,000 or getting ready for an ISO 14,000 recertification audit? And any questions relative to things that may have come up during this presentation? Anybody? I'm not gonna start paying for questions. Okay. Well, no, I really appreciate your time. Again, a number of you are really great customers for us, and I love working with you. If you guys throughout the course of the year have questions or things come up, I always say questions are free. You can reach out to me via email or text is usually the best, or try to call and see if I answer. But don't hesitate if you're stumbling across something or you have a quick question about how to implement something or how an ISO how an ISO auditor might interpret something you're doing. Feel free to send me an email or text. And again, I just
I mean,
appreciate.
I still have your telephone number personally, but this is the best way to contact you, right?
That is correct.
Okay, okay. I remember you the last time you communicated text did work, so
Okay.
expect a text from me. Okay, then.
Okay. Well, and with that, unless you have any more questions, I'm gonna let you go. I will send out the slides if you're interested, and then if there's anything you'd like for me to share electronically or any other questions you have, feel free to reach out and let me know. Thanks, guys.